All right, good morning, everybody. Here to discuss day 3 of the NBA playoffs. Here, another episode of Pick and Pop. Peter Marzano, and we had a good day yesterday. I wasn't able to catch most of the Heat 76ers game. I did see the end of it, and then, of course, there was the San Antonio Golden State game right after that. Only 2 games yesterday, and then we have 3 coming up tonight. But it was certainly a couple of good games. Now, that latter one definitely got away later on in the game. But first, we'll talk about the Heat and the 76ers. And I really think after that first playoff win for Philly, there was just a whole nother added degree of excitement in that city and with their fan base. And I think in general, across the NBA, an added degree of excitement about the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, they completely dominated the second half in that game, really the second through fourth quarters, if we're being accurate, I guess. It was more in the second half. And every part of that team that makes them successful, of course, without Joel Embiid, who was still sidelined, everything was going for them in game one. Ben Simmons looked absolutely incredible. JJ Redick had 28 points. Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova were stellar off the bench. We're getting a lot of contribution defensively from Amir Johnson and Robert Covington. It's those kind of things that really not just keep you in ball games, but allow you to win them, especially against a Heat team that really isn't stacked with talent. Their greatest strength is probably the fact that they have Erik Spoelstra, somebody who has about as great of a playoff pedigree as you could possibly have without being Greg Popovich. So that level of experience and that level of composure that he is able to have in these kind of situations really plays to the Heat benefit. And it's not just Erik Spoelstra. It is, of course, Dwayne Wade. And, maybe it's because I'm from the Chicago area, but I love Dwayne Wade. He's always been one of my favorite players. He's always been, and he's a really good guy on top of it, but he's always been one of the most clutch, exciting players to watch this time of year. And I think you could go back 12 years ago where he put on the best finals performance that anybody had seen at the time since Michael Jordan, when he averaged, I think, 33 in that final series against the Mavericks, took that Shaq and Alonzo Mourning at the time, and they took care of that Dallas team in 6 after falling behind 0-2. But last night, we saw Father Prime jump into a time machine and put the Miami Heat on his back. The Heat ended up winning by 10, 113-103, and Miami dominated the second quarter of this game, 34-13, and that is something that Philly has had a bit of a problem with this year, is that there have been times where they can get just completely shut down for an entire quarter, and that happened in the second. And while Sixers definitely battled back and got the game within 2 late in the fourth quarter, Miami was they made all of the right plays at the right time. And it wasn't just Dwayne Wade, who was a plus 16 with 28, 7, and 3 off the bench, 11 to 16 shooting. It was the fact that they had everybody on all cylinders working for them in making the right plays. The Heat were getting the 50-50 balls. They were really making sure that they were generating good shots on all of their possessions. And I think that really became apparent late in the game, especially coming off of a turnover. One specific play I remember was I think it was their entire starting lineup on the floor. Maybe Wade and Olynyk were out there, but it was just a simple play. It was an extra pass by Josh Richardson into the corner for Goran Dragic, and then he stepped inside the three-point line and hit a shot that essentially put the Sixers away from the game. And it's that kind of play. It's that you know that you don't have that kind of upper level star power. I mean, maybe you used to if you're going to count Dwayne Wade, but he's obviously not that kind of player anymore, 36 years old. But it's just about making the right play, making the right basketball play, not being shut down by the moment. And I think a big characteristic of this series that a lot of people forgot is the experience differential. And yeah, like the Sixers, I don't think anybody's going to go up to you and really argue that the Philadelphia 76ers are not the most talented team in this series. But I think at the end of the day, when you see the level of composure and experience that Miami has, on top of the fact that Philly in high pressure situations with all of these young players, they're going to run into difficulty. They're going to run into times where guys go cold. And that happened yesterday with Robert Covington, who was 3 of 13 from the field, 1 of 9 from 3. That's difficult when you need somebody like that to be hitting all of those shots. Dario Saric, 3 of 10 from 3. JJ Redick, 1 of 7. Marco Bellinelli, 2 of 8. So those were some issues, and they put Ersan Ilyasova in that starting lineup over Amir Johnson. I don't know if Brett Brown's going to try and change that back. I feel like that looked like a welcome adjustment with how well Ilyasova played in game one, and not to say that Amir Johnson didn't do his part in the starting lineup, but I really do wonder if that's going to be a change that Brett Brown goes back to maybe match up with Hassan Whiteside more effectively in that starting lineup. And when Kelly Olynyk comes into the game, how are you going to combat him? Because while he had a better game in game one, he was still coming in yesterday and making those right plays, getting to the 50-50 balls. And in 33 minutes off the bench, 11 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, and a block. And as a Celtics fan, I really enjoy watching this guy play. I obviously enjoyed watching him in Boston, but I think it's cool to see that he's gone somewhere else, and he's the kind of player that could really fit into almost any system. He has a great skill set. He's 7 feet tall. He's a good shooter, a really good passer. And yeah, there's parts of his game that he has to work on. He certainly has to be a better defender down the line, but I really do think that he's somebody that can continue to improve to be a better and better player as time goes on. I think he especially fits well in this matchup and on this Heat team because, you know, the 76ers don't exactly have size per se. They just have a lot of length. I think especially when you're looking at guys like Covington and Simmons and Saric, like those are, and Ilyasova for that matter. And then, of course, once you get Joel Embiid in the lineup, that's where the size comes from. But I think the Heat were just, even in the matchups that they really didn't have the advantage on, were making all of the right moves last night. And I think it was especially impressive that in the fourth quarter, when Philadelphia was storming back, this young, energetic team finally getting some shots to fall, the level of composure that Dwayne Wade is able to have in those situations is being like, guys, I got this. Like, no need to worry. And that's the kind of playoff performance that I think everybody loves seeing the most, is a guy that's experienced, that's clearly past his prime, but can still at any given moment take control of the game. And it was something I talked about when previewing this series, that cannot be underestimated at all, no matter how he performs in a certain game. Of course, he was a little underwhelming in game one, but then, you know, there's a performance like that in the tank, and you just have to know that it's in the tank, that clutch gene is in this man's DNA and always has been. That's what he said yesterday. It's in my DNA. And that was certainly apparent in Philadelphia. So now we have a tied series going back to Philadelphia, and I think it's a wake-up call that, you know, this is still a really, really young team, and you can't just ride them into the finals after this winning streak and one playoff win, as many people started to do, in the same way that you can't write the Cleveland Cavaliers off from, you know, looking like LeBron James and the Cavaliers of years past in future games. Of course, I don't really think that's going to happen. I still think Cleveland will win the series. I don't think that they're going to look great, though. And I think the same thing kind of applies here with Philly, is that their expectations have to be tempered a bit. This is still a very, very young team that has to go through these kinds of setbacks and these kinds of disappointing losses. And, you know, I think they're going to win at least a game in Miami. But, you know, if they go there and end up down 3-1, that is part of the learning curve of being a young team in the postseason. And as exciting as they are, as exciting as they were at the end of the year, I kind of talked about it in my video previewing the series, that there is that fear that they got hot just a bit too early. And while it's always good to roll into the playoffs red hot, now you're there, especially with those last 9 games and the first 2 games of the series without Joel Embiid, everybody's, you know, putting in a bit more. And I think the Miami Heat, while they're certainly not as young, are going to use the youth on their team to really try and combat that and take advantage of that weakness that will seem to be growing from Philadelphia in the coming games. And I think, you know, you look at the youth that is on this Miami Heat team, whether it's Josh Richardson or Justice Winslow or Bam Adebayo, and then you look at more of the experience end of things, of course, Dwayne Wade and Hassan Whiteside and Goran Dragic. I mean, this is a team that, as I've said a million times, you know, it's not really, they're underwhelming. There's really no star power on this roster, but They have a system, they have an identity, they play well together, and they have somebody that is capable of putting the team on their back like Dwayne Wade did. So that was a really exciting game. I think it was cool to see the Heat do what they were able to do. And then there was the Spurs and the Warriors game. And while I had the Spurs winning 2 games in the series, wow, the Warriors look good. They are the Golden State Warriors. They are the defending champions. And I think any doubts about that have been settled in these first 2 games. And that's not to say that I don't think that I'm on the train of nobody can compete with the Warriors now, because they've looked really good in these first 2 games. And I think especially it is worth noting that they were down 6 at the half, that the Warriors just put together in the second half. And I think the Spurs team that is just so outmanned for the second year in a row playing the Warriors, it's just really not an equal matchup. And I was hoping that the Spurs would be able to hang in there more. Maybe they'll be able to get a game or maybe even 2 out of the series. But, LaMarcus Aldridge yesterday has a sensational performance. 34-12, 12-12 from the line, 11-21 from the field. You get 21 from Patty Mills. You get 12 from Rudy Gay, who was put into the starting lineup over Kyle Anderson, who really struggled. And, Greg Popovich made a lot of rotation changes, but this is a team that, in order to beat the Warriors, and I don't mean in the series, I mean in general, in a game, they're going to need to have everything going. I mean, you're looking at this box score, and they still lost by 15. Granted, they were outscored by 21 in the second half. You're going to need Danny Green to not score 0 points. You're going to need Rudy Gay to be in double figures, Patty Mills to be in double figures, LaMarcus Aldridge to have a game like he did last night. And then off the bench, you're going to need Davis Bertans to hit more than 1 3. You're going to need Manu Ginobili, who did have 10 points, but you might need more than that. You might need a double-double from Pau Gasol. You might need even more out of Kyle Anderson, Bryn Forbes, and Tony Parker. So it all depends on what the rotation is. But this is a team that's just so outmatched, even with the Warriors without Steph Curry. I mean, you look at what they were able to do last night, just having Kevin Durant, and I think watching him last night again, and you notice this every time you watch him. And I think especially it's worth noting this, that there's been a lot of conversation about James Harden being like the most unguardable player ever. But Kevin Durant truly is just as, if not more, unguardable, and really always has been. And it's just wild looking at everybody for the Spurs. And, of course, the one guy that could defend Kevin Durant is Kawhi Leonard, and he will not be returning this postseason, which kind of puts the writing on the wall for San Antonio. But, I mean, when you look at Kevin Durant, there's really nobody that can guard him. And looking at Rudy Gay give it a shot, and even Danny Green, who's one of the best defenders in basketball, looking at Dejounte Murray, who's already turned into an elite defender, looking at all these legitimately good defenders, try and take on Kevin Durant. There's nothing you can do. There's nobody that is that height, that size, that has that level of skill, that has that handle. There's just nobody. And there's nobody that can match up to that, because you can put a hand in his face, but it's only going to go up to his chin, and he's going to be able to drop a shot every time. And that's what was happening yesterday. That is what's been happening really his entire career, but especially since he's come to the Warriors. He's just been able to find a shot every time. And when you watch Kevin Durant march his way up the floor and pull up on the elbow for a jumper, I don't think I've ever seen him miss that shot. And he probably won't. He's not going to miss that really too many times at all. And I think we're just being reminded of his greatness when we watch games like this, that no, it doesn't matter if there's no Stephen Curry. Having a player like that is somebody that can make all of the difference. And he did again last night, 32, 6-6 with a block. And then Klay Thompson is 31 himself with 5 threes and 12 field goals. Now, since Klay got it going and Andre Iguodala hit 4 threes out of nowhere, then you really have no way to win a game. So the Warriors just took control in the second half. I don't rule out the Spurs maybe winning a game in this series. At this point, I think it's tough to see it happening, but I think it will be interesting to see how they respond against whoever they play in the second round, who would be the winner of the Blazers-Pelicans series, I believe that would be. Yeah, so that will certainly be interesting. And speaking of that series, they have game 2 tonight in Portland. That'll be really exciting. 3 games going on tonight. Wizards and the Raptors game 2. I would expect to see perhaps a Washington win tonight. I wouldn't say expect, but expect another close game and potentially a chance for the Wizards to win. I think this is a team that saw how close they were in game one, really, despite, letting it go away from them in the final couple of minutes, really do feel encouraged at how they performed in that ruckus environment. And I think a lot of people are expecting Toronto to take these first two games. And I certainly know that the Washington Wizards, at the amount of talent they have, are certainly capable of winning a game on the road. Then there's game two between the Bucks and the Celtics. Expect a lot of adjustments from both sides, maybe even a change in the starting lineup for Milwaukee. Would not surprise me if they tried to mix Malcolm Brogdon in that starting lineup as opposed to Tony Snell. That'll be an interesting change that they might make. And I would expect that to be another very close, exciting game, as I'm sure that'll be the expectation throughout the series. And then Pelicans Blazers, of course, Portland really looking to take a game at home tonight. But, one thing I noticed in watching game one of that series was the fatigue level of New Orleans at the end of that game because of the tight rotation that they played with. So they certainly benefited from having 2 days off. It'll be interesting to see if Alvin Gentry's Pelicans are going to be able to replicate that performance. Other than that, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. There's been a lot of exciting hockey games going on as well that I haven't really talked about, but I've been keeping up with those as well. Some good series. Vegas Golden Knights up 3-0 now, as are the San Jose Sharks, who beat the Ducks 8-1 last night. They're up 3-0 in that series. So a lot of exciting series in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far. And the Vegas Golden Knights are going for the sweep tonight over the LA Kings. So that'll be a good game to watch. And, of course, baseball going on. My team hasn't really been playing at all because of the weather, but they are supposed to play the Cardinals tonight. So that'll be a good matchup. And then, of course, some good series getting started in the MLB this week, most notably outside of the Cardinals-Cubs matchup. Indians-Twins, the top two teams in the AL Central, will be facing off the Red Sox and the Angels, two of the top teams in the American League. Dodgers and the Padres. Dodgers looking to manufacture their way back into the mix as they've just in general struggled this year at 6-9. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. It's been another episode of Pick and Pop with Peter Marzano, and we'll be back tomorrow to discuss what happened tonight in the playoffs.